College Football Nerds here talking Notre Dame and Miami. Huge game in week one, and we are excited to discuss this one. I got my nerd with me, Josh, and Miami fans, you're going to hang on to this because we got a little anecdote that kind of puts y'all in a much better light, contrasted against what Florida State is doing these days. So you're going to want to hang on for that. But another note that Miami fans might find interesting, Josh, is we talked about, I put out a little tweet earlier this year that said I think Georgia's going to improve at quarterback. What I really meant to say was passing game. And you've got some data that might indicate that Carson Beck maybe is better than he showed last year and might actually be a good bit better in a new situation in Miami, and it's not really his fault.
So a couple of years ago, I say that it feels like it, May of 2024, on Twitter we went through and broke down what would have happened in the SEC if you started looking at statistics based on sack-adjusted yardage, the way the NFL does it. College kind of has a problem where they don't include sack yardage in passing yardage. And most of the time that's not a major factor. But for certain players that approach the game in a certain way, guys that throw deep a lot or try to play hero ball, they look really splashy in college in a way that doesn't necessarily translate even statistically in the pros. Two big examples of that: Jalen Milroe at Alabama, and Shedeur Sanders, who was 132nd, 126 in sacks. Those guys had really gaudy yard per attempt numbers, but they were also terrible sack numbers. It just doesn't show up on the stat sheet because in college they count sacks as rushing instead of passing yardage. So I thought, okay, easy enough. You can look up sack yardage for a given team. I can't do it per player, but I could do it per team, and let's just look in the SEC. And the reason was I had a suspicion at the time that it really changed the way you looked at Jalen Milroe coming out of 2023. When you looked at standard college passing yards, LSU, that was the year they had Jaden Daniels, had over 4,000 yards passing, but 10.84 yards per attempt. Alabama was second in the conference at 9.39. Georgia was third in the conference at 9.29 yards per attempt. Generally say anything over 8.5 is very good to elite. 8.5 is very good. 7.5 is a competent passing game. If you're less than 7.5, you're not really competent. So I thought, okay, well, let's throw sack yardage in. First, it confirmed what I thought. Jalen Milroe goes from second in the conference at 9.39 down to sixth in the conference at 7.09. A crazy stat that he had 2.2 sack yards per pass attempt, which is just nuts to think about. But hidden in that, I realized when I ran it, Carson Beck didn't take many sacks. He goes from 9.29 yards per attempt to 8.82. And if you think of it as an NFL statistic, 8.82 yards per attempt is very good. Jaden Daniels was only at 10.03, so about a yard, 1.2 yard per attempt better, and that was with a very, very good receiving core around him. Malik Dabers being the big guy, but also Brian Thomas Jr. So when you talk about Georgia, and that was Georgia with Carson Beck and Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, he was a great quarterback 2 years ago. And everybody knows he was really good, but I mean, this really highlights they were highly efficient. They were really good in yardage, just an effective passer, only threw 6 interceptions in 2023. You fast forward to last year, 6 interceptions goes to 12. His passing yardage per attempt falls pretty precipitously from 9.5 on the season down all the way to 7.8. And, you start to ask, well, what the heck happened? And I think the biggest answer to that really is receivers. I mean, the number one receiver was Arian Smith. Arian Smith, I think, is a talented prospect, but I flagged early on, really coming out of 2023 into 2024. Most Georgia fans will agree with this, by the way. Not a great receiver. He just doesn't have polish in his game. There were a couple games like the Texas game where they had huge negative plays because he ran the wrong route or was in the wrong position. Number 2 guy was Dominic Lovett. Number 3 guy was Dylan Bell, who wasn't healthy through the year. And I can go down the list, but a lot of the guys that remain aren't major factors. You actually have to go from third in the receiving list all the way down to 7th just to find the next receiver with London Humphreys. I think that was the biggest reason that Georgia struggled. And I've talked to a lot of people that do a lot of evaluation that I trust, and pretty much all of them felt like Carson Beck was really undervalued and underrated. They felt like he did a better job than anybody appreciated. They felt like just as a whole, offensively, they weren't very good at running the ball at Georgia last year. The receiving corps was well below average. The offensive line wasn't even really that good as it was expected to be. And really, they felt like he did a pretty good job of handling everything he did. Like second half against Alabama, almost came back and won that with his arm. He just didn't have the talent around him to be successful. So, Daniel, what I would say is with Carson Beck, it is one thing to talk about a player and say, this is a guy that I can take a step forward and be a great guy. This is a player that could really advance himself, polish some things, and be fantastic. That's not Carson Beck, because Carson Beck was that good. 2 years ago, Carson Beck was the second best quarterback in the SEC, behind only Jaden Daniels. I think Carson Beck is really underrated. I think Carson Beck wasn't overly focused, in a bad situation last year. This year, in a new situation with a new offense, I think he could be very successful for Miami. If he's focused, if he understands what he's doing, I think he's one of the more underrated people in college football this year.
So, on the other side, you've got a first-time starter in CJ Carr, and right now, everybody's kind of, I don't want to say dinging Notre Dame, but kind of like we have in our Texas and Ohio State preview. We talked about how, starting a new quarterback, first-time starter against a top 10 team, that's a tough situation. Like, I don't care how good the team is around you, that's a lot to put on somebody. And this is where Notre Dame fans are going to be momentarily mad at us, but I want them to understand that this is a positive. Same thing happened with Texas fans. You and I were on the record all year, and maybe going back to his Duke days, definitely going back, because I remember talking about it, we were not high on Riley Leonard. Not as a overall dynamic quarterback, as a passer, like great locker room guy, but we were never high on him. Notre Dame fans were mad at us when we were not so high on him. And we're talking about elite quarterbacks that are going to lead you to the promised land. But what that means is when you lose a guy that maybe was beloved but not that great, is, there's opportunity and room for improvement. I want you to give the analogy in the same kind of conversation or context that we did with Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning, who's going to have his real first start against a decent team.
It's always hard to have your first start in a meaningful game, but I think with Ewers and also with the situation at Notre Dame, they had guys that understood the offense, that were heady leaders for the team, could get them in the right position, try to carry them through, but were also kind of a limiter. Riley Leonard, as you said, we weren't very high on him. I know it irritated Notre Dame fans preseason when we did some preview stuff. It irritated them when we did game reviews. Look, guys, I know maybe you believe it, maybe you don't, but we try to be fair. I don't think Riley Leonard was a huge loss. And when you talk about draft potential, Riley Leonard went 6th round around the same kind of era that Ewers went. He's not an NFL quarterback, and I think he was brought in with the expectation that maybe he could take a step forward. We'd seen too much tape from him at Duke. We knew that he wasn't a very effective passer. I'm looking through his game log passing statistics, Daniel. A&M 5.3 yards per attempt. Northern Illinois was 5.1. Get to the end of the year, Georgia was 3.8 yards per attempt. Notre Dame won that game because of their defense and special teams. Riley Leonard threw the ball for 90 yards.
3.8 is a bad rushing number.
Right. And it's not just that. It's 7.1 yard per on the year because they played Stanford and Army, and dotted in there, we said 7.5 yards per is a competent attack. He only did that 6 times out of, however, like 16 games. It just was not a good passing attack. Now, they did a lot of stuff offensively because he was a good runner. His threat to run made the rest of the run game more effective. I will caution, the run game may be slightly less effective than people expect because most fans, and especially media, do not really properly appreciate what having a running quarterback does schematically to a defense and how much harder it can be to run without that added component to it. We've seen it a little bit. We talked about it with LSU when they lost Jaden Daniels. I said, when they lose him, I don't think that they're really that good in all those pieces. His threat made a lot of other stuff a lot better, and sure enough, without him, they took a huge step back. The running game wasn't very effective. But I just don't think he could pass very well. I just don't think he could.
Where's the part where Notre Dame fans actually like us? Because I promised them that they would like us at some point.
Well, you cut me off, man, but I think C.J. Carr is that dude. I mean, I think he's a really talented player. I think he has the ability to throw at the level they need to throw at. It's going to open up the offense. When you talk about what Notre Dame did last year, one of the big things that stands out to me is Greathouse was really key to them down the stretch, and an emerging player. I mean, they didn't have any 600-yard receivers, but again, I think that's kind of because of what they had. And between him and Faison, I think they're stepping forward into having a better collection of skill talent than they'd had the last few years. You combine that with the running backs that are phenomenal. I know you kind of worship at the altar, I think, of Love and Price.
Very much so.
This is a really, really, to me, an offense that's in a great position to take a step forward. They have almost all the offensive linemen back, a receiving core that should be better than it was last year, just returning talent, new talent. Quarterback, I don't think is even really a negative to me, paired with a great defense. I think Notre Dame's in an excellent position, and I think it's a little bit of addition by subtraction, frankly, to move on from Leonard, who, for the amount of money they paid, had to be the starter. I think they are going to be a better, more dynamic offense and more capable of winning games where high scoring is the name of the game. Understanding they made the playoff last year, they kind of had to do it in a grinded out mode on the back of the defense for the most part. Lots of scares like the Southern Cal game. I think they're just going to be a lot more dynamic this year.
Josh, I want to take a moment. I've been doing this. I've been on this tour for all off season, and now the season's here, but I want to make sure that I get Notre Dame and Miami in this little bit. Both of these teams deserve a ton of credit. Like Miami scheduling Notre Dame out of conference week 1, it's a real game. It's a real team. ACC teams do a really good job with this, honestly. But Notre Dame gets a lot of flack for their schedule, and it kind of bothers me. It really bothers me. I think I've gone on this rant before, but I did this rant on Twitter. I'm going to do it in video form. It's not Notre Dame's fault if they schedule a name program who shows up to play Notre Dame and they suck. We've seen it with Florida State. We've seen it obviously with Stanford. Like, they can't help if USC is a 7-6 team. They can't help that, and USC's trying to get out of that game, and Notre Dame's like, hey, just be good because we want to keep playing you. It's important to football. They've got Miami and Texas A&M 1-2. They're playing another SEC team in Arkansas, which, whatever. USC, Boston College, not very good, not their fault. And so there's not an FCS team on this list. Boise is a great G5 that they scheduled. Like, scheduling is all about intent. Notre Dame, I don't care if they join a conference. I'm so tired of people saying, this is what I told somebody on Twitter the other day. I was like, if you could have the TV rights, the deal that they've got where they own all the TV revenue, you could have the schedule that they're able to get playing brand names week in and week out, and you can still have a path to the playoffs, you would take that. I don't care which team you are. You would take that 10 out of 10 times because you're not splitting money with the conference. It's smart. They can do it because they have that brand power. So I wanted to kind of take a moment and kind of celebrate that and just continue to mention scheduling is about intent. If you schedule brand names and when they show up they suck, that's not your fault. You intended to schedule a good team. That's like saying Alabama when they scheduled Florida State this year or in 2016 or 17, or when Texas scheduled Michigan. They can't help if they suck. They did their part. All right, enough of that. Josh, we noticed something. I noticed something about Florida State, and you noticed something about Miami regarding the transfer portal. I want you to get in that a little bit because Florida State released their depth chart yesterday, and I was kind of really underwhelmed because when you get into the details, it's like, yes, Florida State saying we're a whole new team. We're not the same players that was 2-10 last year. We've gotten rid of all those players. but they're replacing them with guys in the way I term it is they're transferring down, meaning they couldn't get on the field where they were, so they're going somewhere else that is less than so that they can get on the field. So Florida State's starting a guy at like defensive end that couldn't get on the field at Nebraska last year, or another one that couldn't get on the field at Tennessee last year. Not so much the case with some key players at Miami.
So, my big soapbox for teams dating back to a couple of years now at Florida State versus last year is it seems pretty obvious that if you're pulling people up from smaller schools that were impact player at smaller schools, could be a Conference USA, could be, Ohio State pulling Caleb Downs from Alabama. Is that a smaller school? I don't know. Those guys tend to make you a lot better. But when you're taking guys that couldn't start one place, like you said, and then moving them over, what you end up with most of the time is Brock Vandergriff, right? You just somebody that's just not effective, and then you end up being, a Kentucky team that just can't pass the football. And Florida State last year had a lot of guys. And the reason I name Alabama, they had like 5 guys from Alabama that were not going to start for them, and they were terrible.
You might say they had their own Brock Vandergriff.
Right. I mean, DJU, I don't know if you want to see moving up or down or what that was, but it wasn't even necessarily those players. It's just the sum of those parts. You very quickly saw, okay, these are why these guys aren't starting. And especially when you put them together, you got a bunch of guys that weren't really capable of playing with other starters. And when you make a team out of them, maybe they're good talents, they're just not ready yet, or maybe they have flaws in their game. But all those things showing up together kind of becomes, a mess. And when you look at Miami, one, they take Carson Beck, who was 100% the starter at Georgia. My biggest issue with Georgia this year, which we haven't done a ton of content on due to, just some family stuff that we had to deal with. We plan to, but I don't think there's any question they wanted to start Beck this year if they could have. And he's moving to Miami for money, for better scenery on the field, off the field, whatever that scenery was that may or may not still be there. But you look at other guys like David Blay Jr., right? Comes from Louisiana Tech. He was all Conference USA. And when you look at like Jared Verse, the thing that flies under the radar, Jared Verse played in the lower division of football, but he was an All-American in that division before he went to Florida State. Yeah, it took him like 1 year he was really good, and the second year he was phenomenal. But it seems like those guys like Blay, are the bigger impact players. And that's what Miami's done to a pretty significant extent. This roster has been built up with guys that were actual good players at other schools, at least a handful of them at key positions. That's the kind of thing that makes you a better football team. And that is very different for me between Miami and Florida State. And Daniel, I'm going to kind of run with that comparison front, with sticking within the ACC to try to make Miami fans, who I think historically we've picked against them a lot. Sorry. You've also lost those games, just being honest.
Except for the Notre Dame game.
Compare them to Clemson. Yeah. Miami, when you compare them to Clemson, there's some interesting things in our statistics, right? Because Clemson's getting top 5 love this year. We did a LSU Clemson video. We kind of alluded to it. Both of us are skeptical of that because in our statistics, you can go to collegefootballnerds.com. We have these relative performance statistics. Basically, how did you do against the teams you played versus how those teams did against everyone else? Basically, are you 8 yards per attempt or 9 yards per attempt, but were you 10% better or 10% worse than a given opponent's competition was? Looking at your whole schedule, pretty simple statistic that we calculate, but do it across the whole season for every team in a lot of different statistical categories. Again, free on collegefootballnerds.com. In fact, we're not even running ads right now. We're actually just paying to host the website for people just for free because we think it's useful to have. Clemson defensively, Daniel, 72. Miami was 72nd in that statistic in scoring defense last year, 45th in pass defense, 57th in rush defense. Those are not good numbers. Everybody knows that Miami's defense struggled. But Clemson was 44th in scoring defense, 29th in passing, but 98th in rushing defense in that statistic. And it really dawned on me looking at this, Miami we run a computer model, and you can model any one team versus any other. It won't open up until week 4 because we need a lot of on-season data. We don't let people run it early because you just get something completely meaningless. And on principle, we'd rather not do that. We had Notre Dame, the fourth best team in the country last year in our model. We had a Miami, the 11th. And Clemson was only 26th. So to me, I knew Miami's defense wasn't very good, and I still think that might be an issue we can touch on in a minute. But I want to highlight that they weren't very good, but they were not quite as bad as a lot of people made them out to be. Scoring 72nd was horrible, 26.7 points per game, especially relative to competition. But in everything else, they were way worse on scoring defense than any other category, partly probably because the offense was putting a lot of strain on the opposing teams, lots of possessions, that kind of thing. But, more importantly to me, in individual statistics, they were better. Really, they were worse than the sum of their parts, but the parts were better than people realized. And that, to me, Daniel, gives me a lot more positivity about Miami from a roster building perspective from last year, but also just in what they return. I think this Miami team is kind of underrated. And I don't know if you want to comment on that, but I'll say I think they were underrated, but I also think Notre Dame is really, to me, kind of underrated going into this season.
Yeah, I think that, so there's two things here, really. There's who Notre Dame is in week one versus who Notre Dame's going to become playoff time. I think Notre Dame is a playoff team. I think Miami is probably a playoff team, because I think Miami could lose to Notre Dame and Florida, which I'm not convinced that they're worse than Florida. Go 10-2 and still make the playoffs. Like they avoid Clemson in the regular season. Right now, I would probably put them ahead of Clemson, just with what I know. But I'm probably a little lower on that defense than you are, given that 42 to Iowa State, 38 to Cal. Several games in the high 30s and 40s with an ACC schedule, but new defensive coordinator, got some new, beefed up some positions there. Josh, my question to you, and this might lead you into your pick. I talked about Ohio State being potentially one of the most improved programs from week 1 to week 12, but losing to Texas in week 1. Because everything's fresh. New coordinators, new quarterback, all of that. Even if we think CJ Carr is a long-term upgrade over Riley Leonard, is the roster around Notre Dame, which I think is actually really good and, like you said, underrated, enough to overcome a seasoned quarterback on the other side of the ball on the road? There's a lot of factors at play that I think may not be a problem in week 11, that might be a problem in week 1. Is it enough for Notre Dame to overcome that quarterback newness and get a win?
Honestly, Daniel, I think the answer is yes. I mean, in our system, again, relative performance, we had Notre Dame the number 1 rush offense in the country last year. We had them the number 4 scoring offense in the country last year. Now, they were only 64th in passing. That's why that was a whole diatribe. They were not great passing the football, but I think they could be better. Defensively, the number 2 scoring defense. We had them the number 3 pass defense, the number 22 run defense. I mean, they're going to miss Xavier Watts. I think it's notable, Daniel, that in the draft, even the big studs, Watts and Kaiser, went 3rd and 4th round.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they lost as much really as people expect. And I know those guys were big leaders on the defense. They were very sound, consistent players. They were not massive, instant impact NFL guys. And I think that maybe, I know there are other factors involved there. I'm really high on this Notre Dame team. The more I dug into it, I thought they were really underrated at the end of the year. It took them a long time to get there. I felt like, and I think it's true, that they had a real ceiling. I think they saw that against Ohio State. One of the reasons I made Notre Dame fans is, we made the point. And look, I still don't think it was really wrong. By halftime of that game, it was just clear they could not stay with Ohio State on the perimeter. If Ohio State had kept their foot on the gas and kept throwing the football, I think that game would have gotten a lot uglier. They kind of let off. Frankly, they let off in that game, and Ohio State never really found that gas pedal again through the playoff all the way through the championship. That's a different story. But I don't think Notre Dame was there by a fluke either. Old school power football is becoming more effective because defenses have moved to more zone schemes, aggressive attacking, gap penetration defenses, disguising looks. The way you beat that is isolation reads and power football. Zone coverage means guys are on the heels. Yes, they're looking in the backfield trying to get interceptions, but you don't have guys attacking the line of scrimmage as readily, at least at the snap. Notre Dame is really geared themselves around trying to avoid that. They've had great recruiting classes. That roster's phenomenal. Return almost all the offensive linemen. This really ought to be the best run attack in the country. And again, maybe they take more of a step back than expected because of Leonard and what he did for him, but it still really on paper should be the best rush game in the country. A defense that returns a ton of talent, even though they lose a couple impact guys. I think this is a phenomenal Notre Dame team. Daniel, they could be top 10 or top 20 in every statistic. They could be top 5 in a handful of statistics, number 1 in a couple, and nothing worse than top 20 in the others. That's a championship caliber team. I think there may be some ceiling to them because I still don't think at the receiver position they have the high-end talent. And we say this a lot. College football in particular has gotten to be a game where to beat the elites, you really have to have a Jeremiah Smith. I don't know that Greathouse is that guy. I think he's good and he has a lot of potential. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Carr. One, he's not Jeremiah Smith because no one is. I mean, that kid may be the best kid in 15 years, and that's not an exaggeration. But I think overall this team is just really well built. So I think these are two very good football teams. I'll lead into my pick, Daniel. I'm going to say I have this game. I'm actually going to say 34-24 Notre Dame. I think their offense is more effective than it's being given credit for. There are too many transfers defensively for Miami, too, for me to be that confident in their defense in week 1. So as much as I've talked them up and said, one, I think they're being viewed as worse than they really were. Maybe a lot of it, frankly, is the fact that Clemson's probably getting more benefit of the doubt than they should be getting. And they're kind of lucky the way the schedule shook out that Clemson could win the title last year in the conference, honestly, in my opinion. I still think Miami's defense has weak points. I think they're going to be shaky early. Maybe they gel later. I like what they did in the transfer portal, but it may take some time. Notre Dame's going to be ready now. Other than if they have serious issues at quarterback, I think they're going to be ready now. I like Notre Dame in this game by a decent margin. I think Notre Dame probably should have been ranked higher than, 6th in the country. I think they're a better team than Clemson, just straight up. Daniel, I'm going to say it right now. Penn State fans keep catching strays. I think they're a better team than Penn State. And Penn State's second in the country in the AP poll. I'm really high on them, and it's no knock on Miami to say that I have Notre Dame favored. I think these two teams are both very, very good.
Before I get into my pick, I want to give you a point to ponder and get your thoughts. Can you pull up Notre Dame's schedule real quick?
I've got it in front of me.
Okay. What quarterback did they face that was on par with what Carson Beck's going to bring to the table?
What did they face last year?
Yep.
Well, I had their 25 schedule. Okay, here's 2024. Not A&M. Northern Illinois, Purdue, Miami of Ohio. I mean,
they didn't see a good quarterback last year.
Schaff at Louisville was pretty good. They beat. Now that was a close game, 31-24, but that was a good quarterback. But when you run through the rest of it, after the transition, man, USC fans hated me in week 1 when I said that I didn't think that they were that good because the quarterback was good. And sure enough, they benched him. Haven't gotten a lot of apologies for that, but you're right. They get Georgia with a backup, and he wasn't ready. We're not that high in Drew Aller. And they did face, Will Howard was a good quarterback. He was a very good quarterback last year where he was at in that offense. But that was a game where Howard put up a lot of yards. So I would say there were a couple, but I will also say, Daniel, when you talk through it, Louisville, 6.4 yards per, but 264 yards. Ohio State had 11 yards per attempt. They were very effective. But, you're not wrong. There were not great quarterbacks on that schedule, and that was, again, our number 3 pass defense. Again, entirely opponent adjusted when we say number 3. But it's still, like we say a lot, some things don't really get challenged until they get challenged. There were probably some things there, again, like Ohio State, when they were facing Notre Dame's man coverage, they exposed them. It happened a lot with Don Brown at Michigan that their defense would go into November being the number 1, number 2, number 3 defense in the country, and then they played their marquee games, particularly against Ohio State, and would get absolutely torched. Because if you play a more simplified, sound-based defense with guys that know the scheme, you look really, really good against inferior personnel, but then that simplicity just absolutely kills you when you play a high-powered offense with some superior personnel, or at least guys with matchup advantages. So it is an interesting point, Daniel.
I also want to touch on one thing you said about how Ohio State probably could have done a little more there. Notre Dame has been unfairly, maybe tangentially, assaulted over the last year with the margin of victory in the Indiana game. Please give me 30 seconds on that.
Okay.
Because I know it bothers you. I know it does. So I was gonna say it, but I'm gonna give it to you.
You're just trying to make me angry. You know, we had the insane rant at the end of the LSU Clemson game I went on, and now you're just trying to drive me up a wall. Yeah, I don't know how many. I've been arguing with media on Twitter about this, Daniel, and they're saying, "Oh well, I mean, they did pretty well that game." Like, what do you mean they did pretty well in that game? I mean, it was 27-3 with what? It was like a minute and 30 seconds left. I mean, yeah, they threw a touchdown pass with a minute 27 seconds on the clock to make it 27 to 11. I think that's right. It's nuts. I mean, they get the onside kick versus Notre Dame's backups, because at that point, I don't think even Notre Dame even had the starters on the kick coverage team, and then they score again on Notre Dame's backups with 25 seconds left to still be down 10.
Right.
So even if they got the onside kick, there's just literally not enough time to get 2 onside kicks and throw 2 Hail Marys. The game was over.
Right.
At halftime of that game, I forget the total stats, but Notre Dame had like 2.5 times the yardage of Indiana going into not even halftime, the last 3 drives. It drives me up a flippin' wall every time it's brought up. That game was not remotely competitive. Notre Dame buried them, clearly outclassed them. And yet we still have people saying, oh, well, you know, Indiana, well, that margin, Notre Dame's margin with Indiana was closer than Indiana's margin with blah, 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 blah. Like, give me a break, guys. And Notre Dame crushed Indiana in that game. And anybody saying that just didn't watch the football game, or at least doesn't understand how to watch football. Okay, I'm mad. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I'm just glad we had an opportunity to touch on that, because it's something that's bothered me all offseason. And really what it is Big Ten fans trying to prop up Indiana as deserving. It cascades down to them deserving to be in the playoffs, which justifies the 12-team playoff. And at the same time says, well, they did better than Georgia did against Notre Dame, so it puts down the SEC. None of that matters. What matters to me is intellectual honesty, and to say that Indiana played Notre Dame tight in that game and it was just a 10-point margin is just a complete misrepresentation of what actually happened there. All right, my pick, taking forever. I've got Miami winning this game. I don't usually pick Miami, but I think that the delta between Carson Beck in his 3rd year as a starter and first start ever for CJ Carr is too much to overcome, even though I like Notre Dame's roster and coaching staff more. You also have first time, defensive coordinator. He was at Minnesota, but first time at Miami, first game with this team, that sort of thing. So that's a question too, but I think that there's going to be a little bit of shock in this Notre Dame defense facing a really good quarterback, and things are going to bog down. And I've got Miami now, but I've got Notre Dame in the playoffs. I think I agree with you with all the other things you said. I think they're underrated on the whole for the year. I just think week 1, it's too much to overcome. So give me Notre Dame 20, Miami 27. Josh, this has been a long one, but honestly the most fun I've had, I think, in a year in doing a preview. Why don't you close this out with a final thought, and then I'll wrap it up.
Just to make sure that Notre Dame fans don't feel like we've redeemed ourselves, I will note one thing, which is the spread being only 2.5 is a bit surprising to me. The over-under 49.5 isn't surprising. That's about the number we're both floating around. But there is one red flag to me, Daniel, and that's 2 of the last 3 years, 2022 and 2024. Quite frankly, I don't think Notre Dame showed up really ready to play at the start of the season. Last year, 2 years ago, they opened with Navy. That Navy team was just terrible that year defensively, in particular, and then got a tune-up against Tennessee State. But 2022, they lost to Ohio State 21-10 in the opener, and then they lost to Marshall, remember, 26-21, barely beat Cal 24-17. And by the end of the year, they were one of the best teams in college football, actually. They were really, really good. Beat Clemson, blew them out, but they started awful. And then last year, kind of the same deal, right? A&M 23-13 in what was an ugly game. A&M couldn't move the football at all. In retrospect, given what Notre Dame was the end of the year and what A&M was, Notre Dame really should have killed Texas A&M. Northern Illinois, they lose that game 16-14, which is just totally inexplicable. There is something to Freeman's teams out of the gate being unprepared. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's that they don't self-scout well. I don't know if maybe, the style of offense they're running needs more time to gel. I couldn't tell you. But I'm just saying there is a verifiable pattern that they have come out of the gate unprepared. So to your point, Daniel, about having experience at quarterback, there may be something to that. I would have expected the spread to be a little larger because Notre Dame, on paper, I think Miami's very good, but Notre Dame's roster is kind of borderline elite. But it won't shock me if Notre Dame comes out of the gate here and lays a bit of an egg. Even if they win, they just kind of lay a bit of an egg, and they're not nearly the team that they are in the season, because that has been a historical trend for Notre Dame. Don't shoot the messenger. It just is what it is. I think Freeman's going to certainly get judged for it if they come out in another season, and be it Miami or A&M or Arkansas or whatever, if they come out and have another game early in the season against what should be an outmatched opponent or a winnable situation, and just, especially offensively, just lay an absolute egg.
Yeah, Josh, we got the Notre Dame fans in our good graces, and then you just had to end with facts, and facts are bad. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for hanging on for this long. This was a really fun one. We're both high on both of these teams, so it's great they're playing in week 1. Also, Miami deserves credit because they're playing 2 Power 5 teams out of conference. I forgot to mention that earlier. They got Florida, so I want to make sure that they get credit where it's due. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. And by the way, if you've hung on this long, please like, subscribe. But if you really want to help us out, share this wherever you talk football. Forum, Facebook, whatever. Email it to your grandma. It'll help us out. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.